Affordability is front and center for most Americans today. Just last year, President Trump won an election in part by appealing to Americans who were hit by rising food, energy, and home prices. 1 year later, prices are still going up, and Democrats are now hitting him on affordability, blaming his tariff hikes in part for pushing prices higher. Now, the president has changed his tune.
There's this fake narrative that the Democrats talk about, affordability. They just say the word. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. You just say it. Affordability. The word affordability is a con job by the Democrats. The word affordability is a Democrat scam. Affordability is a hoax that was started by Democrats.
Well, either way, new polling from Politico this past week shows that 46% of Americans say the cost of living is the worst they can ever remember, including 37% of Trump voters. Increasingly, economists are warning of a so-called K-shaped economy that is now taking shape, in which the rich continue to do well while the middle class struggles to grow. You can more or less illustrate the K-type economy with a number of metrics, but here's a stark representation. The red line represents the growth of the S&P 500, stock market returns that generally favor the wealthy. The blue line represents consumer sentiment, which has been largely weighed down by high prices that put more pressure on the middle and working classes. We can see the sharp divergence between the two, creating that letter K. The Associated Press explains it this way. Simply put, the upper part of the K refers to higher income Americans seeing their income and wealth rise, while the bottom part points to lower income households struggling with weaker income gains and steep prices, end quote. Joining me now is Justin Wolfers. He's a professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. He's the host of the Think Like an Economist podcast. Justin, great to see you. Thank you for being here again.
Always a pleasure, mate.
Let's talk about a couple things here. First of all, prices generally don't go down unless something's broken in an economy. But the polling is not a complaint from people that prices are higher. It's that the cost of living is tougher than it's been. So people can sort of do the math on that. If their wages are increasing and inflation's under control, they don't necessarily think about it as an increase in the cost of living. The issue here is that prices are rising faster than either inflation or people's savings.
Let me just try and put that in simpler terms, because a lot of people are out there saying, I wish prices were falling. And the reason for that, by the way, is it's the president's original sin, which is in the election campaign, he lied to people. He said he was going to get prices back down. Prices don't fall in healthy economies. It was an irresponsible claim at the time, and hoping that he'd live up to it would be dreadfully painful. So, look, the way we normally make up for this is prices rise and then your wages catch up and then you end up whole at the end. That's how it normally works. One thing to realize, though, if it's a price rise driven by higher costs, what economists call a supply shock, and here you might think about tariffs or the lack of availability of immigrant labor, that's what happens there is your employer's costs go up, so they raise their prices. There's no extra money to pay for a pay rise. And so when you get a supply shock driven price rise, which is what we're getting right now, there's actually little reason to be optimistic your wages will catch up, hence the affordability crisis.
So during COVID, lots of governments sort of tried to explain the fact that this is not our fault. It's an international problem. I mean, people, rightly or wrongly, did hold Biden responsible for some of it. And across the world, people threw out governments that had been in power during COVID because they blamed them for weak economies. Americans seem to be making some distinctions here, that this is not an external and exogenous threat that's causing increased prices right now. It's in some case, these tariffs.
Oh, it's not just tariffs. So, look, calling affordability a hoax, why would a president do that? He'd do that if he was running an anti-affordability agenda. Anti-affordability may not be what he's aiming for, but it's the effect. So there's the tariffs, there's undermining the Fed and possibly appointing a partisan hack in the future, which could cause inflation to take off. There's mass deportation and immigration restrictions, making it harder for farmers to pick their crops. There's the one big beautiful bill, which was the largest redistribution from poor to rich in a single bill in American history. There's Obamacare subsidies expiring, which is going to raise the cost of health insurance for millions of families. There's the overall attempt to undermine Obamacare altogether. There's a fiscal policy that involves a lot more government borrowing. That's going to raise interest rates and that's going to raise your mortgage repayments. There's attempts to cut SNAP. There's cuts to renewable energy subsidies. Almost every single thing this guy has done has harmed the ability of regular families, not the rich, but regular families to get by.
Hence the K-shaped economy. Justin, let's talk about that. You brought up a Fed chair. We all know that Donald Trump doesn't like the Fed chair that he claims that Biden put in place. He made Jerome Powell a Fed chair. He seems to be landing on the National Economic Council director, Kevin Hassett, as his possible choice. Kevin Hassett used to be, an important guy at the American Enterprise Institute, a fairly mainstream conservative economist, but he's now a very Trumpy fellow. Tell me why this news got buried to most people because so many other things are happening. Tell me what putting Kevin Hassett in that job might mean.
Yeah, so it is a very important job by some measures. Some people call this the second most powerful job in the world. You're running the world's biggest economy. The chair, of course, doesn't do it by themselves, but they have an undue influence. The problem is, well, actually, let me tell you the history. The history is we have had magnificent Fed chairs. Yep. They haven't gotten everything right, but through yours and my lifetime. Let's go back to a previous Republican president, George W. Bush, appointed Ben Bernanke, who went on to win the Nobel Prize in economics. We recently had Janet Yellen, who's an incredibly esteemed economist. And to put this bloke in would be a complete and abrupt departure from the way we've typically done this. And what's worrying is not that Kevin doesn't know economics. There was a time when Kevin Hassett knew economics. But for the last 10 months, this bloke's been relentlessly on talking points. And it's not just talking points. He has a sense that his role is to serve the president and the president's whims, even when what the president is doing is completely at odds with the standard way economists think about the world. And so there is the possibility. We've seen it happen in other countries like Turkey. You appoint a loyalist.
Right.
The loyalist puts in place policies that reflect the president's idiosyncratic, utterly bizarre, dreamtime views about how the economy works. And what happened in Turkey was inflation rose to 80%.
Yeah, and we're struggling. We're still not sure that, we want it as high as 3% here. It's not an abstraction when you get to 80% inflation. Fed chairs don't need to be antagonistic toward the president, but they do need to be independent. Their decisions have to be made on the data and the stuff that they actually see out there.
They need to be independent. They need to be courageous, willing to do what's best for the economy, even when it feels difficult. They need to serve the American people rather than the White House. They need to have good judgment and a sensible model or understanding of how the economy works overall. And they need to show intellectual leadership, because the thing is, when you come into this job, you know all of the things that have happened to the American economy through history. But every Fed chair gets a whole new different dish served up to them. Some have had to deal with a pandemic or a financial crisis. And so I, through those moments, was always so comfortable when we had our best and brightest running the Fed.
That's the way we want to think about it. Justin, great to see you as always. Thank you. Justin Wolfers is a professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. He's the host of the Think Like an Economist podcast.